Well, tonight what I want to do in our few remaining moments, we started 2 weeks ago, I started what is really a 3-part series on going deeper with God. And we looked at Moses, and we were in chapter 3 of Exodus, where Moses turns aside to see a burning bush. And this is really the start of what God's going to do in Moses' life. If he sees something that is not natural and doesn't consider what God is doing supernaturally, then nothing is going to happen in his life. And sometimes, and I would suggest that many times what God does is he gets our attention to draw us closer to him. And often that's by doing things that aren't natural, that we recognize are unusual, and it's God's way of causing us to lean into him. And what you and I do in that moment determines what we're going to experience from God. And yet what's interesting is that you can have encounters with God that are incredibly powerful, and yet out of that, not overcome some of the issues that you've carried with you all of your life. Sometimes God does that instantly, but I would suggest many times there are people who have encounters with God, and yet they are still like Moses in this sense. He is bound up by personal insecurity. And no encounter with God is going to necessarily overcome the insecurity that you have relative to your inadequacies or your failures. And here's Moses. He says in verse 11 of Exodus 3, "Who am I?" And we looked at that last time. How many times he says, find somebody else. I can't talk. I can't do it. He is completely overwhelmed by his inadequacies. And frankly, that's where a lot of people live. They're so aware of what they can't do that it's hard for them to believe God can do something with them. And so when you follow Moses, it's a very interesting study on how to deal with the insecurities in our life that can help us overcome those things and be used by God. God's answer to Moses in the next verse, and God said, "I'll be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." And it's interesting, Moses says, "Who am I?" And God says, you're gonna find out who that is in worship on the mountain. You're gonna find that out through a sustained encounter with my presence. And last week we talked about this principle. It's simply this: it's in the forgetfulness of self and the focus on God that we come to understand who we are. As long as ministry is about you, it's never going to be fully about God or about the people that we're called to minister to, and you will do it out of an insecurity that drives you in different ways to do things that aren't ultimately healthy. Or it will cause you to actually try to make things happen because your identity is bound up in what happens rather than in the God who has called you to do whatever it is he's called you to do. And here's what's interesting. Moses, 40 years in the desert of kicking himself over the failure of all this defeated, self-defeating talk about I can't do this, I can't do that, I shouldn't have done that. All of that does not help him overcome either his personal insecurity or his self-centered focus. So beating yourself up isn't making yourself feel like less, is not gonna move you into a realm of humility where you think of God more. In fact, I would suggest it just simply continues to grow within you when you give voice to it or you give mental space to it. What's interesting as well is all kinds of miracles cannot stop him from focusing on himself. And I find this really, really interesting because he's gonna do some amazing miracles. He's gonna turn the Nile into blood, and when they're digging up water, looking for water, it's blood. He's going to cause the land to teem with the power of God, with flies, with gnats, with frogs, with different things. Hail's going to come down, storms, livestock's going to die. I mean, there's just one plague after another, and it is so powerful, so breathtaking. And yet here is Moses, and no amount of the power of God working through him will help him overcome this personal inadequacy that he feels. What has to happen for him is the same thing that needs to happen for us. The only thing that will help people overcome the personal insecurity that I think most people deal with, some more than others obviously, is sustained time in the presence of God. And when he comes to Mount Sinai, 40 days in the presence of God radically changes him and takes him from a place where he has been consumed with thinking about himself to a place where he's not thinking really about himself at all. It takes him from a place where he's telling God what he can't do to a place where he is depending on God exclusively to do what only God can do. And you get this self-forgetfulness. You see it in Exodus 34 when Moses came down Mount Sinai carrying the 2 stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. He wasn't aware that his face had become radiant. This is the place where you want to be, where you're not thinking about yourself. He's not even thinking about what an incredible time he had in the presence of God. He's just simply thinking about God. And he's thinking about the people. And when you're thinking about God, you're thinking about people and you're not thinking about yourself, you're gonna find yourself ministering to people in a lot of ways that you wouldn't any other way. And so this is Moses, and he's fundamentally different from this point on. One of the verses that is the proof of that is Numbers 12:3. Now Moses was a very humble man. How humble? More humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. A stunning statement on Moses. But that change in Moses is not sustained by the burning bush moments in his life. And this is the thing I think is really important for us. God gives us these times in his presence, or these times in a service where God reveals himself to us, or circumstances that happen, and those are wonderful, but those will not sustain you in terms of your walk with God, where it's about him and not about you. That kind of change happens not through a burning bush. It happens through a continual commitment to being in the presence of God. And there is a sense in all of our lives where we are spiritually no more and no less than what we are in God's presence. The time we spend alone with the Lord. And so what I want to do is I want to talk to you just for a few moments about this and look at it in Moses' life. There is a scripture I think about a lot. It is one that comes to me a lot. It's just in 2 Chronicles 15:1, the Spirit of God came upon Azariah, son of Oded. This is the story of Asa, king of Judah. Asa's just come back from a big battle, and Azariah comes out and says, listen to me, Asa and all Judah and Benjamin, the Lord is with you when you are with him. So the key to having the hand of God on you is not a burning bush. It's a personal commitment to being in the presence of the one whose eyes burn with fire. And this particular passage in Exodus 33 that we're gonna look at has probably done more to motivate me in my personal time with the Lord than any other passage in the Bible. It is Exodus chapter 33, verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his tent door, and they would watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. Here's what I want you to notice here. He's got to go to the tent before there's a pillar of fire. You know, it's his discipline in saying, I'm going to go to the tent of meeting. And we're gonna see when he goes to the tent of meeting, he's leaving the camp of Israel. In the encampment of Israel, Moses lives in the center of it where the tabernacle is, and there's 2 million people. We get that number because the Bible says when they came out of Egypt, there were 600,000 men armed for battle. So scholars say there were probably around 2 million people that are moving out into the desert. And so imagine an encampment with 2 million people. And so what Moses is going to do is he's pitched a tent outside of the community and where they're encamped. So he's got to walk all the way through this encampment of 2 million people. It's going to take him a little bit of time. And then the rabbi said the tent was pitched a 1,000 or a Sabbath day walk outside of the community, and that would be approximately 5/8 of a mile, so a little over a half mile. So he's going out there, and so when he gets out there, there's no pillar of cloud. But when he goes in the tent, God comes down. That's very instructive for you and I. It's when you say, I'm going to get alone with God, that you're going to experience the power of God. Now, let me say this. I'm grateful for anybody who prays at any time, and Paul said we should pray without ceasing. So praying in your car, great. Happy you do it. But if that's your devotional time, that's not getting alone with God in an undistracted, where your attention is undivided. That's prayer, yes, but that's not this. And my concern is there's a lot of Christians who have satisfied themselves with listening to a worship tape as they're driving on the way into work and called it devotions, and you're not going to encounter the presence of the Lord in a way that's going to transform your life in the same way as when you get alone with God like this, it's going to do something in your life that's going to change you. And I'm not saying you're not going to be changed anytime you pray. Obviously, there's a work, but I'm talking about something that moves you beyond the insecurity and the distractions of this life, moves you into the presence of the Lord, where God does such a deep work in you that you aren't even aware of it, but everybody else is. To me, that's the real mark. When God's done something so profound in you, you don't have to tell people, oh, wow, my prayer time was good. They can look at you and tell it was. You don't have to tell people God's been working in your life. They can look at you, listen to you, watch you, just be around you and tell that he is. That's the mark of God's work. That's what's happening to Moses, and it happens because he goes to the effort of having a private, personal time with God where there are no distractions. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, each at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. What we're talking about is a communion with God that is extraordinary. And these things are written down, Romans chapter 15, Paul writes, for our encouragement and our hope, that you and I might be encouraged, that we might learn from these lessons and then emulate them in our life. Now, let me just say this, because the tent of meeting, when you read the book of Exodus, there is in Exodus 33, verse 7, the tent that Moses places outside the camp. And then in Exodus 35, there is the tent of meeting, which is the actual tabernacle. One is personal, the other is corporate. It's very interesting to me that before we talk about the public or the corporate tent of meeting, it talks about the personal tent of meeting, because the personal tent of meeting always comes before the public tent of meeting. If you're going to come in here or you're gonna do anything publicly in the way of ministry, you better have done something privately in the way of communion with God. So here he is, he's going to this tent of meeting, and it's not just Moses who went to the tent of meeting, but in Exodus 33 and verse 7, the last part of the verse, it says this: everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. So anybody who really wanted to seek God, they went out to that. And yet at the same time, what happens is there are some people who they see the cloud come down, the pillar come down, and they worship at the door of the tent. And the Bible's drawing a distinction between people who see God moving at a distance and worship, and people who actually go to the tent and seek him. And I would suggest to you it's the same today. That you and I have a choice. We can serve God from a distance that doesn't interrupt our life, that doesn't cause us to leave any of the things of our life, to set them aside to be in his presence. And there certainly is a worship that is there, but if you really want to get close to God and seek God, then you got to leave a few things behind. So let me ask you this, and I really want to challenge you. This is not to guilt anybody. This is not, I don't want anybody feeling condemned. I want people to feel challenged and encouraged to do this because of the difference it will make in your life. Do you have a daily time with God where you meet with God without distraction? And if the answer is no, then you're missing out on what I would say is arguably the most important thing you could do to transform your life and the lives of people around you. For some of you, the idea of getting alone with God and having nothing to distract you, you're like, I don't know how long I could do that. And so what I want to do is I want to give you just maybe a few things that seem a little bit mechanical, and they will at first, but ultimately you will find yourself growing in your time with God. So maybe what you would do is you'd say, I'm going to spend 15 minutes alone with God, and you'd set a timer. And you know, that first time you do it, you might be thinking, wow, this is a long 15 minutes. What you will find is eventually it goes like that. And you'll find that it begins to build from there. But you got to start somewhere, and I'm afraid sometimes what people do is they only stay in or stay there until they run out of things to say, and then they leave. But it's in the learning to wait on God and be with God that you really learn to have that communion with God that will transform your life. So let me give you three things. Number one, decide to meet daily with God. You got to make a decision. It's not going to happen accidentally, I can tell you that. You got to say, listen, this is so important. And you're going to see as we go next week into Exodus chapter 33, what happens to Moses, what the takeaway is from this time with God. It is so incredible. And my hope is it just makes you hungry to say, I want a part of that in my own life. And there are so many things vying for our attention and vying for our time that unless you and I decide we're going to have time alone with God without distraction, it will not happen. Exodus 33, verse 7, now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp. This is so critical. And he called it the tent of meeting. So I think what you have to do is you're thinking of this, you have to say, okay, where can I go that I can do this? Susanna Wesley, the wife of John Wesley, she would actually take her outer skirt, because they'd have the petticoat and all that, she would take it, and she had 19 kids. So, I mean, let's she would take the skirt and pull it up over her head, and her kids knew, don't bother me when I'm doing that. And she, John Wesley, Charles Wesley, she raised kids that loved God, but she was known as a woman of great prayer, but that was her way of getting alone with God. So maybe you're gonna go in a closet. Maybe you're gonna do, I pray in our basement because I can, the way it was set up when we bought the house, they had set it up for kids, and so it's like a kid's playroom, but they set it up with some indirect lighting that can be almost virtually dark, and you don't really see much, but there is enough light, so there's no distractions, because if there's a window there, that could be, for me, a distraction. So for me, that works, and that's my place where I have my tent of meeting. It's not that that's the only place I pray, but that is the place I regularly pray, and that is where I start my meeting with God. You need a place like that. And again, praise God for driving on the way into work, but you have to be distracted or you're gonna have a wreck. So that is not the same. That's what I'm trying to help you say. I'm not trying to be legalistic on this. I'm trying to say there's more. If you'll give God more, he'll give you more. Number 2, decide to remove distractions. So as I said, the Talmud said, the rabbi said that the tent of meeting was 5/8 of a mile, a Sabbath day journey outside the camp. So he's going through the camp, and now he's gonna walk this half mile, a little over a half mile. He's gonna get to the tent, and he's gonna go in. And when he goes in, now all of a sudden, the glory of God comes, and Joshua is stationed outside the tent of meeting to keep anybody from coming in and interrupting him. And the thing that, the takeaway from that is, you know what, you gotta do without your phone. You say, oh, but I'm looking up stuff on my phone. I'm looking at Bible verses. That and Instagram and Facebook and Twitch and everything else. Yeah, right, TikTok. You're like, oh, this, get a notification. Oh, I gotta watch this. And what happens is you spend more time watching stuff than you spend time waiting on God. So to get rid of the cell phone or whatever else it is that's going to interrupt you, and say, listen, I'm not gonna have that, because this is my time to be alone with the Lord and to wait on him. And I think indeed put some space between you and the normal trappings of life. Now, let me just say this, and I want to put a little caveat in here, especially for young mothers, and that this time alone with God is really difficult when you have little ones, because of a lot of realities. You're up all night because one's sick, and now you got the other getting up early, and you feel like you never get rest, you never get time to yourself, and now you're like, well, I don't know where I'm gonna find time. Here's what I would encourage you to do. Find somebody who has raised their children, and you're watching their kids, they're loving God, serving God. Go to them and say, how did you do that? It doesn't mean you're gonna do what they did, but it may give you some ideas, and God could speak to you on how to do that. But I realize for that season of life, in that situation, it is very difficult. And what you're doing in raising children, especially in those early years, at any age, but in those early years, you're shaping that child's identity, that child's understanding of so many things. Some people say half of all a child will know at age 18, they learn in the first 3 years. So the time you're spending with your children is very, very important. And I'm sympathetic to that, but I'm saying to everybody else, remove the distractions. Finally, decide on a name for your meeting place with God, whatever it is. It's, whatever you want to call it. Moses called it the tent of meeting. And so he would tell people, I'm going to the tent of meeting, and people knew, well, he's going to the tent of meeting, and we're not going to see him for a while. We're not going to be able to bother him right now. so that your family knows, because I don't think it's fair to the family for you to be, and they're like, they don't know where you are, they don't know what you're doing, but you're saying to them, listen, this is what I'm gonna do. Maybe you're up early enough, it doesn't matter, they wouldn't care. But at least have a name so that when you say, this is what I'm gonna do, people understand what it is exactly you're doing. And then I think for me, you know, mine's not complicated, I just call it my appointment with God, but it would be very, very unusual that anybody could get a breakfast appointment with me. I just don't do it. And you say, well, wow, you could do a lot of breakfast. I could. And I would be meeting with people and not with God, and I'm not gonna make that trade-off. You say, well, meet with God later. Listen, that surely is more difficult for me, because once the day gets going, it's going. So to have that time, you're establishing boundaries in your life that say, this is what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna make that investment because I know that as I'm much with God, he'll be much with you. God wants you to go deeper in him than you've ever been before. Some of you I know already have your devotional time, and for you, this is so rudimentary. You're like, man, I've been doing this for a long time. And I say to you, awesome, that's great. But there are a number of people, and that's not where you're at. And this, again, is not to guilt you or to shame you. This is to say there's so much more for you, but it begins with that dedication to personal time with God in an undistracted place where you are dialed in and focusing on him. And who knows what God will speak to you, show you, and do in you as you have that time with him. God in an
Thank you so much for joining James River Church on our YouTube channel. Our prayer is that God encouraged you and your faith was strengthened today. And we would love for you to be a part of our online family. As well, we would love if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell for notifications. You'll be so glad you did, because we're always putting out great sermons, new worship content, and it helps you know when we go live for our weekly services. We hope you have an amazing day, and thank you again for watching. God bless.